Legendary sword users known as heroes possess the peerless might of 1,000 warriors, capable of splitting clouds and cleaving enemy nations in two. A young Sulfort eagerly shows his mother his favorite book, declaring his deep admiration for the strength and coolness of these legendary heroes. Looking up with innocent hope, the boy anxiously asks his mother if she thinks he has what it takes to become one too. His mother offers a gentle smile, reassuring him that hard work never betrays you and that he can absolutely achieve his goal. She firmly promises that with dedication he will become an amazing hero just like the ones in his beloved stories. Clinging to his childhood dreams and his mother's heartfelt words, Sulfort silently vows that he will undoubtedly become a hero one day. Years later, wooden swords clash fiercely as an older Sulfort engages in an intense sparring match. The sharp voice of an instructor abruptly halts the duel, declaring that the practice is over. Breathing heavily from the exertion, a frustrated Sulfort realizes he has suffered yet another defeat. The stern instructor points out that Sulfort's younger opponent possesses superior sword technique and undeniable natural talent. Delivering a crushing blow to the boy's pride, the instructor bluntly states that victory is decided by innate talent, something Sulfort simply lacks. Refusing to accept this harsh verdict, Sulfort stubbornly insists that his failure stems from a lack of training rather than a lack of talent. Gripping his training sword with white-knuckled intensity, the young swordsman refuses to let his spirit break. Channeling his frustration into resolve, he fiercely decides that he just needs to train harder and longer than anyone else. He convinces himself that if he pushes his body to the absolute limit, his efforts will absolutely bear fruit. Envisioning a future forged by sweat and blood, he believes this relentless grind will finally make him strong. With burning determination in his eyes, Sulfort boldly screams out his unyielding promise to become a true hero. Time marches on as the young man steps out into the unforgiving world to test his mettle. Driven by poverty, he joins a mercenary company for real combat experience and quickly rises to become the best swordsman from his village. Marching into a new battle commissioned by the Empire, he reflects on the transient, money-driven life of a mercenary with no permanent affiliation. Anticipation surges through his veins as rumors spread that a genuine hero will be joining their forces on this very battlefield. In the chaotic heat of combat, an enemy soldier shrieks in agony as a brutal strike cuts them down. Thrilled by the fluid swing of his blade, Sulfort enthusiastically realizes that his endless training is making him stronger and stronger. Brimming with newfound battle confidence, he readies his stance for one final, decisive push against the enemy ranks. Suddenly, a colossal, explosive impact violently shatters the battlefield. Tremendous shockwaves rip through the air, leaving utter devastation in their wake. The chaotic clash of arms falls dead silent as the combatants freeze in sheer terror. As the thick dust clears, a commanding and imposing figure emerges from the cratered earth. The enigmatic warrior stands calmly amidst the apocalyptic carnage they just unleashed with a single strike. Glancing at the stunned onlookers, the arrival casually apologizes for being late to the skirmish. Staring in absolute awe at the devastation, a trembling Sulfort wonders if this transcendent being is truly a hero. Overwhelmed by the incomprehensible display of power, he realizes this entity is not a mere hero, but a terrifying monster. Dark despair creeps into his mind as he questions if a lifetime of effort could ever possibly bridge the gap to such godlike strength. Crushed by the insurmountable wall of innate talent, Sulfort wonders if his dream of becoming a hero is fundamentally impossible. He clenches his battered fist, the crushing weight of his own mediocrity bearing down on his soul. The harsh, unforgiving reality of the world threatens to extinguish the fire in his heart completely. Snapping his head up, he defiantly grits his teeth and decides it is entirely too early to surrender. Refusing to abandon a lifetime of sacrifice, he swears he has come far too far to just give up now. 50 long, grueling years pass by in the blink of an eye. In a quiet town, oblivious bystanders point and cast casual glances at a weathered, elderly man. Whispering townsfolk observe the elderly man, noting that he has spent over 50 years surviving within various mercenary companies. They gossip about his unnatural obsession with the battlefield, a grim dedication that earned him the fearsome moniker of Shura. Scoffing at his weathered appearance, a bystander dismisses him as a senile fool seeking death and predicts he will perish in his next clash. Ignoring their mockery, the old warrior internally reaffirms his single-minded pursuit of a true hero, knowing such legendary figures only exist on the battlefield. Driven by this unwavering resolve, he continues his march toward the front lines to meet his ultimate destiny. Out of nowhere, a mysterious figure materializes and addresses the veteran by his infamous title. The stranger flails his arms defensively, hastily assuring the startled swordsman that he is entirely trustworthy despite his sudden appearance. Introducing himself as a mere passing magician, the eccentric arrival declares he has an important question for the veteran. Intrigued by the interruption, the old warrior repeats the magician's unexpected inquiry regarding his deepest, unfulfilled desire. Boasting that magic can make any dream a reality, the stranger eagerly presses the hard-working swordsman to reveal his ultimate wish. Staring silently, the veteran cautiously analyzes this bizarre and eccentric individual blocking his path. Recognizing an undeniable aura of power beneath the strange behavior, the old man senses this encounter is no ordinary coincidence. Gazing toward the horizon, the swordsman admits that if he were to die before achieving his lifelong ambition, his soul would not rest. He solemnly confesses his desire for a second chance at life, prompting the grinning magician to accept the extraordinary challenge. Thrilled by the veteran's unyielding pursuit of heroism after so many grueling years, the magician bursts into delighted laughter. Pointing the way forward, the magician advises him to join the Raftinon Kingdom army, promising that the elusive hero he seeks awaits in the Mat-Atari Mountains. The mysterious caster imparts cryptic parting advice, urging the old warrior to use the forthcoming overwhelming strength as his sustenance. Arriving at the perilous battlefield, the veteran finally confronts one of the fabled Six Wings, the greatest champions of the continent's largest empire. The legendary hero stands tall amidst the chaos, her name, Irene Delpher, echoing with intimidating authority. Locking eyes with the elderly challenger, Irene coldly asks if he is the rumored warrior known throughout the empire as Shura. Gripping his blade, the old man bitterly reflects on the dishonorable weight of his blood-soaked moniker. The imperial hero questions his unnatural longevity, demanding to know why a relic from the previous generation remains so utterly obsessed with war. Disdainfully evaluating his lack of honor and mediocre skill, she questions the core of the undying obsession that keeps him refusing to retire or perish. Brushing off her arrogant interrogation as foolish, the veteran sharply retorts that his heart is not tied to the bloodshed of war. Tightening his weathered hands around his hilt, he declares that the fundamental reason he wields a blade remains entirely unchanged. Exploding into motion, the aged swordsman launches a desperate, full-force assault against the transcendent warrior. Pushing his mortal body to its absolute limit, he roars that he refuses to die before grasping even a sliver of his childhood dream. With terrifying grace and minimal effort, the imperial hero effortlessly evades his desperate strike and readies a lethal counterattack. Unleashing the peerless might of a true hero, she unleashes a colossal, blinding shockwave that obliterates the surrounding terrain. As his vision goes white from the devastating blast, a haunting voice whispers that harboring foolish dreams only leads to this inevitable destruction. His fading consciousness drifts back to his childhood instructor's cruel words, labeling him a hopeless half-wit destined for mediocrity. The phantom memory reminds him that his inherent magical limits are pathetically low, completely devoid of the divine talent required to stand alongside heroes. Mocking his lifelong struggle, the memory asserts that no amount of blood or sweat can ever bridge the insurmountable chasm between ordinary men and true heroes. Sinking into the cold embrace of death, Soulfort accepts that his entire life of grueling, desperate training amounted to nothing more than a half-baked effort against absolute power. Despite the crushing defeat, a stubborn ember remains in his soul, wondering if a second chance at life would allow him to chase that heroic summit once more. Darkness consumes his vision entirely as his battered mortal shell finally succumbs to the hero's overwhelming strike. Suddenly, a sharp gasp tears from his lungs as life violently returns to his motionless body. Trembling with disorientation, the seasoned warrior forces himself upright and frantically surveys his unfamiliar surroundings. Checking his fully intact body in sheer disbelief, he stammers into the quiet air, desperately trying to comprehend how he is still alive. Remembering the lethal blow dealt by the Six Wings hero, he pieces the impossible truth together, realizing he has actually been resurrected to fight again. Stirring amidst the desolate ruins, the bewildered warrior stares at his own hands and questions his sudden return to consciousness. Inspecting his dramatically altered physique, he desperately wonders if this new, delicate body truly belongs to him. Running frantic hands over his head, he is utterly shocked by the unfamiliar sound of his own voice and the feeling of long, flowing hair. Tracing his unblemished face, he marvels at the completely foreign sensation of youthful, wrinkle-free skin. Looking downward, a terrifying realization begins to dawn on him as he critically examines his surprisingly petite chest and torso. Staring into the void, the battle-hardened veteran screams internally upon realizing he has inexplicably been reborn as a young girl. Panicking slightly, he reaches down to investigate the lower half of his new anatomy for any shred of his former identity. Confirming his worst fears, he solemnly notes the complete physical absence of his original male anatomy. Connecting the dots, he astoundedly realizes that the eccentric man from his past truly was the greatest magician to pull off this resurrection. Gripping his head in frustration, he bitterly complains that he only asked for a second chance without specifying the exact details. Scowling fiercely, he curses the cruel irony of being reincarnated into the seemingly fragile form of a tiny, young girl. Doubting his grim future, he wonders how such a weak vessel could ever aim to become a hero without possessing a massive OD capacity. Recalling his past life, he remembers that grueling physical training generates inner magical power, a process severely hindered by his pitifully low original limit. Reflecting on past failures, he painfully acknowledges the insurmountable, innate upper limit of OD capacity that he was cursed with at birth. Analyzing the strong, he remembers that legendary heroes like the overwhelmingly powerful Irene earned the title of humanity's strongest purely due to their massive, innate OD reserves. Focusing his newfound senses inward, he cautiously probes the latent magical energy humming within his new, slender vessel. Shattering his previous doubts, he detects a terrifying, overflowing torrent of power surging beneath his deceptively frail exterior. Trembling with excitement, he is completely overwhelmed by an immeasurable amount of OD far beyond anything he ever experienced in his past life. Testing his combat stance, he realizes that this immense magical density easily compensates for his total lack of physical muscle. Snatching a sturdy branch from the rubble, he flawlessly executes a high-speed, aggressive sword swing to test his new physical limits. Unleashing pure destruction, the sheer force of his casual strike instantly blasts a devastating shockwave that violently rips through the battlefield debris. Panting lightly, he marvels at the seamless fluidity of the strike and the complete absence of any physical discomfort. Smiling confidently, he casually dismisses his new, petite proportions, knowing he will adapt to the changed reach and stride in no time. Finding a discarded blade, he perfectly adjusts his tiny grip and joyfully declares this highly capable new body entirely worth training. Deducing the truth, he realizes that the brilliant magician flawlessly transferred all of his hard-earned OD from his previous muscular frame into this slender one. Thinking back to his crushing defeat, he reflects on the Six Wings champion Irene and finally grasps the true essence of the mythical hero he chased. Experiencing a profound revelation, he understands that being a true hero fundamentally equates to being the absolute strongest. Accepting his harsh past, he admits that it was utterly impossible to bridge that gap with his original limited mortal vessel. Finding immense solace, he realizes that his 50 relentless years of grueling effort were not a mistake despite his previous death. Connecting the phenomena, he excitedly understands that this new body perfectly converted his decades of muscle conditioning into pure OD. Grinning fiercely, his youthful face lights up as he confirms that a lifetime of blood and sweat was absolutely not in vain. Recognizing this miraculous second chance, he swears that combining his current magic with fresh physical training will easily surpass his old limits. Clenching his tiny fist, a renewed and unyielding ambition violently ignites within his warrior soul. Staring boldly toward the distant horizon, the reborn fighter fiercely vows to finally claim the legendary seat of a true hero. Interrupting his epic monologue, his small stomach growls loudly, prompting him to awkwardly prioritize finding a meal. Glancing at his exposed feet, he pragmatically decides that wandering a ruined, jagged battlefield barefoot is a spectacularly bad idea. Scavenging the immediate vicinity, he unearths a discarded, diminutive set of garments that perfectly fit someone of his current stature. Slipping into the slightly baggy clothes, he shrugs off the poor fit and accepts that it is vastly superior to remaining defenseless and exposed. Plotting his immediate survival, he resolves to loot emergency rations from the fallen soldiers before scouting the camp's main food warehouse. Finalizing his plan, he prepares to completely abandon the apocalyptic carnage and march toward the nearest populated village. Shattering the silence, a harsh, commanding voice angrily demands to know what the white-haired intruder is doing in the ruins. Halting mid-stride, An approaching soldier is visibly bewildered and utterly confused to find a mere child lingering amidst the devastated war zone. Glancing over his shoulder, the reincarnated veteran instantly identifies the hostile newcomers as heavily armed Imperial soldiers. Gripping his scavenged sword, he fully embraces the impending violence and signals the bloody commencement of his second life. Startled by the unexpected sight amidst the ruins, the Imperial soldier questions if the intruder before him is merely a child. His comrade quickly assesses the situation, doubting that such a small refugee could possibly be a spy for the enemy coalition. Staring back in absolute silence, the reborn warrior carefully analyzes the heavily armed men confronting her. Maintaining a calm and submissive demeanor, she quickly lies and claims to be nothing more than a lowly serf. In the Imperial year 220, the Mat-Atari region became a fierce battlefield where three powerful nations sparked a bloody conflict over vital resources. One of these reigning superpowers was the Ganner Empire, a terrifying force commanding the legendary Six Wings in opposition to the rest of the continent. Standing firmly against this imperial threat, the Raftinon Kingdom and the Baianese Kingdom forged a desperate coalition to hold the front line. Reflecting on her past life, the reincarnated veteran remembers joining the coalition forces purely to cross blades with humanity's greatest hero. Accepting the grim reality of her previous demise, she realizes that the old Soul Fort is officially dead and the Empire has achieved total victory in the region. Back in the present, one of the soldiers casually dismisses the rising tension, urging his comrade not to get worked up over a harmless kid. Stepping forward with an authoritative glare, the guard sternly demands to know the young girl's name. Pausing for a fraction of a second, she hastily searches her mind for a suitable alias to protect her true identity. Nodding innocently, she introduces herself as Soul, ensuring they know she lacks any complicated titles or nicknames. Feigning desperation, Soul claims her village was burned down and practically begs the soldiers for food and a chance to work. The soldiers exchange bewildered glances, utterly taken aback by the child's bizarrely practical and bold request. Realizing she stands out far too much to be abandoned in a war zone, they reluctantly agree to help the hungry refugee. Ignoring his partner's shocked protests, one soldier decides they must escort the unusual girl back to their military stronghold. Feigning total ignorance, Soul tilts her head and innocently asks what they mean by taking her to a fort. The guard proudly explains that the Empire has successfully occupied the former coalition's stronghold known as Balboa Fort. Gathering intel upon their arrival, Soul internally confirms that barely any time has passed since her previous death on the battlefield. Corporal Baldo warmly greets Assistant Corporal Nad at the gates, officially declaring that the young girl will be kept under Imperial custody for the time being. Grumbling at the bureaucratic decision, another soldier cynically assumes the charity work is just a cheap ploy to improve the Empire's public image. Secretly thrilled by the unexpected turn of events, Soul realizes this Imperial protection is an absolute blessing in disguise. Securing her immediate survival, she relishes the fact that she will not have to worry about securing her next meal. More importantly, this proximity to the Empire offers her a genuine glimmer of hope to reunite with the transcendent hero she failed to defeat. Clenching her small fists, she resolves to relentlessly train her new body until the fateful day they finally cross paths again. Solidifying her grand ambition, the reincarnated warrior prepares to take her very first step toward claiming absolute strength. Staring directly at the commanding officers, the seemingly innocent girl boldly interrupts their conversation with an unexpected request. Shock echoes through the courtyard as the bemused officers repeat her absurd demand for a sparring match and assign Nad to humor her. Completely exasperated by the order, Nad complains that he is a proper Imperial soldier who lacks the time to babysit an arrogant civilian. Glaring down at the petite challenger, the veteran soldier loudly reiterates his absolute refusal to entertain such childish games. Ignoring his harsh dismissal, Soul coolly presses the matter by demanding to know the exact victory conditions for their duel. Chuckling at her sheer audacity, Nad mockingly suggests playing for the first hit so he does not appear to be violently bullying a child. Noting her confident stance, the soldier condescendingly reminds her to respect her elders while cautiously acknowledging her potential as a mage. Dropping into a relaxed and unassuming posture, Soul politely apologizes for her rudeness and readily accepts his patronizing terms. Drawing a simple wooden training weapon, Nad sighs heavily and prepares to end the farcical duel as quickly as possible. Suddenly, Soul surges forward with a blinding burst of aggressive speed, catching the arrogant soldier completely off guard. Brandishing her own practice blade, she calmly declares that she will not even need to rely on magic to secure her victory. Still grossly underestimating his tiny opponent, Nad lazily readies his guard, foolishly believing he is merely entertaining a sheltered brat. With a booming shout that shatters the tense courtyard silence, the fateful mock battle violently begins. Stepping into the courtyard, the combatants prepare for their sudden duel. With a sudden burst of speed, Nad launches himself forward to initiate the clash. Lunging aggressively, he vows to make the young girl realize her place with a single decisive hit. He swings his wooden blade with lethal intent, determined to forcefully establish the hierarchy between them. The heavy training swords collide with a sharp crack as the two fighters meet in the center of the ring. Stumbling slightly from the unexpected resistance, Nad gasps in utter disbelief. He stares in shock, completely stunned that a mere child managed to block his full-force strike. Smirking confidently, Sol effortlessly holds her ground as her opponent marvels at her lack of preliminary movement. Analyzing the exchange, Sol recognizes Nad's attempt to use a killing tactic meant to strike her blind spot. She deduces that he instantly adapted his technique upon realizing his original angle was impossible against her small stature. Assessing his reflexes, she notes how he swiftly shifted his target to aim directly for her head. Observing his disciplined demeanor and handling of equipment, she confirms that he fights like a properly trained recruit. Pushing back against the blade, Sol gracefully maintains her defensive stance. Despite his rank, she acknowledges that his level of skill proves he is truly a capable Imperial soldier. A thrilling sense of joy washes over the reincarnated veteran as she relishes the sheer excitement of a mock battle. Refusing to accept reality, Nad wonders if her block was a mere fluke and prepares for a follow-up attack. Kicking off the dirt, he dashes forward to close the distance once again. Noting her impressive skill, Nad observes how she deliberately hides the trajectory of her sword behind her own body. Slashing downward with intense ferocity, Nad attempts to break through her flawless guard. A tense, suffocating silence falls over the courtyard as their weapons lock in a deadly stalemate. Gritting his teeth, the Imperial soldier lets out a frustrated grunt as he struggles against her surprising physical strength. The wooden blades violently clash again, sending sharp echoes bouncing off the fort walls. Sparks practically fly from the impact as the two warriors exchange a flurry of high-speed blows. Slipping past his aggressive swing, Sol smoothly glides out of the danger zone. Regaining her balance in a fraction of a second, she readies her weapon for a swift counterattack. Channeling her inner veteran, she mentally taunts the younger soldier and dares him to make the next move. Stung by her silent provocation, Nad tightens his grip and glares fiercely at his tiny opponent. Admitting that going all out against a child is unbecoming for an adult, he decides to drop his restraints. Raising his hand with dramatic flair, he begins chanting a mystical incantation to call upon the heavens and earth. Hearing the sudden chant, Sol immediately braces herself for a magical assault. She narrows her eyes, intensely scrutinizing his physical posture as the supposed spell activates. Swirling energy seems to gather around the soldier as he continues his intimidating verbal barrage. Staring right through the theatrical display, the veteran warrior calmly reads his true intentions. Calling him a fool in her mind, she sees past the elaborate deception without a shred of hesitation. She instantly recognizes that the grandiose magical chant is nothing more than a tactical bluff. Believing he created a perfect opening, Nad lunges for her wrist and confidently declares his victory. Effortlessly pivoting on her heel, Sol completely dodges the trap and prepares a devastating counterstrike. Watching him charge head-on, she realizes that his combat style is surprisingly linear and straightforward. A faint smile crosses her face as she admits she actually respects warriors who fight with such honest simplicity. Catching him entirely off guard, Sol lands a crushing blow that leaves the arrogant soldier grunting in pain. The intense clash reaches its climax as the two combatants stare each other down. Dust billows across the courtyard as they brace for the decisive exchange. Spotting a crucial weakness in her opponent's stance, Sol immediately capitalizes on the opening. She delivers a blindingly fast strike that completely shatters his guard. Exhausted from the sudden burst of energy, Nad gasps for air while trying to steady his trembling body. Panting heavily, he struggles to comprehend the sheer speed and power of the tiny girl standing before him. Staring blankly at the ground, the seasoned soldier mutters in absolute disbelief that he has actually lost. Crushed by the humiliating defeat, he agonizingly questions how such an impossible outcome could happen. Complimenting his underlying talent, Sol casually dismisses his shock while he frantically demands to know what kind of monstrous technique she just used. She calmly explains that his defeat simply stems from a fundamental lack of real combat experience. Pointing out the trembling in his hands, she notes that he is clearly unaccustomed to facing true killing intent and overwhelming pressure. Breaking down his movements further, she explains how she noticed a fatal hesitation in his step immediately after he attempted to use magic. She criticizes his overly honest combat style, warning that his failure to recognize her turning his own bluff against him leaves him easily exploited. Advising him to remain cautious and use his footwork better, she promises he will become truly strong if he stops rushing impatiently for victory. She lectures that steady, persistent training is the only way to sharpen his wandering eyes and hone his battlefield intuition. Realizing she is rambling like an old instructor, Sol suddenly stops herself and falls silent. Snapping out of her instructional trance, she formally apologizes for her unprompted lecture. Admitting her old bad habits slipped out, she gently tells the baffled soldier to feel free to ignore her advice if he finds it useless. Confused by her surprisingly mature tone, Nad tilts his head and lets out a bewildered gasp. Shrugging casually, Sol refers to herself as a fraud while the soldier tries to process her bizarre confession. Dismissing his assumption that it is a bad joke, she solemnly reveals that she is merely pretending to be a young child. Staring directly into his eyes, she coldly declares that she is actually many times older than him. A heavy, stunned silence blankets the courtyard as Nad absorbs this terrifying revelation. Sweating nervously, the defeated soldier wonders what on earth this monstrous entity disguised as a little girl truly is. Meanwhile, miles away, an unseen observer deduces that the Empire's greatest hero is heading north and leaving the Six Wings absent from their fort. Recognizing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, the shadowy figure confidently suggests launching an assault to take back the fortress. Gritting his teeth, Nad curses his miserable luck at being forced to babysit an ignorant brat like Sol. He bitterly reflects on his stellar time at the military academy, where his instructors constantly praised his unparalleled reflexes and absolute mastery of armed combat. Unrivaled in both physical and classroom subjects, he was undeniably the top honor student of his entire generation. Born as the eldest son of a wealthy merchant family, he was blessed with a prosperous future and every possible advantage in life. Despite all his natural gifts, a dark shadow of resentment clouds his mind as he desperately laments his lack of true innate talent. 3 days after the humiliating mock battle, the sun beats down on the quiet fort courtyard. A group of idle soldiers leans against the wooden fencing and points toward the training grounds. They openly gossip about the mysterious serf child who recently caused an uproar in the camp. Oblivious to the whispers, Sol intensely swings her wooden practice sword in a series of rigorous drills. She maintains a flawless, focused rhythm as she continues to push her new body to its absolute limits. Standing nearby, Nad glares at her with a volatile mix of fierce resentment and lingering humiliation. Scoffing aloud, he turns his back on the tiny warrior and attempts to ignore her relentless training. The group of gossiping soldiers spots Nad and saunters over to relentlessly tease him. Mockingly calling him out, they demand he regale them with his usual arrogant stories. They sadistically press him to share the embarrassing details of his recent defeat against the tiny runt. Sarcastic grins plaster their faces as they beg the former honor student to add this humiliating loss to his glorious military record. Nad stays completely silent as his mind flashes back to Sol's unsolicited combat advice regarding his footwork. The cruel taunts escalate as his peers maliciously anticipate his glorious return to the imperial capital. Reaching his absolute breaking point, Nad snaps his head up and shoots the bullies a terrifying, murderous glare. Intimidated by his sudden killing intent, the bullies awkwardly backtrack and quickly scramble away from the furious soldier. As the cowards retreat, Sol approaches her disgruntled babysitter and notes his sour attitude. Nad immediately snaps at her, angrily demanding that she keep her mouth shut. Clenching his fists in frustration, he orders her to stop calling him her senior because it only enrages him further. Sol accepts the rejection in silence and calmly turns away from the furious young man. Walking across the courtyard, the veteran acknowledges that her strained relationship with Nad is entirely her own fault. She admits that crushing him in a mock battle and lecturing him like a child inevitably made him the laughingstock of the fort. Sighing softly, she concedes that she absolutely cannot blame the proud recruit for holding a bitter grudge against her. She senses that his earnest nature keeps him constantly watching her, completely unable to forgive his own perceived weakness. Suddenly, an older officer interrupts her thoughts and asks if she has a moment to spare. Recognizing the friendly face, Sol respectfully acknowledges Corporal Balboa as he approaches. The two step into the scenic outer corridor, a spot the corporal clearly favors for quiet conversations. Resting his arms on the stone railing, the veteran soldier gazes out over the sprawling fort grounds. Without turning around, he gently notes that walking the path of a solitary outcast is a painfully lonely existence. Sol stares at his broad back, slightly surprised by the sudden depth of his sympathetic observation. Brushing off the pity, she boldly challenges him to join her training, earning a swift and dismissive refusal. The wind howls across the massive stone battlements as the two unlikely companions share a rare moment of peace. Sol internally accepts that everyone in the garrison treats her like a bizarre, dangerous anomaly meant to be avoided. Breaking the comfortable silence, she bluntly asks why he goes out of his way to interact with her. The corporal smiles warmly, casually admitting that he simply dislikes acting cold toward a defenseless child. Looking down at her tiny hands, she wryly agrees that her deceptive appearance makes her look exactly like a naive, greenhorn little girl. Staring down at the tiny warrior, Balboa casually admits that he sometimes seriously doubts she is just an ordinary child. Looking up with genuine curiosity, Sol asks if his observation means he finally sees her as a true equal. Trailing off thoughtfully, the veteran soldier hums to himself and playfully extends his hand toward her face. Letting out a sharp groan, Sol flinches backward as he lands a swift, stinging flick directly against her forehead. Balboa bursts into hearty laughter as the young girl continuously whines and clutches her bruised head in pain. Mockingly grinning at her reaction, he teases that falling for such a painfully obvious trick proves she truly is just a naive kid. Pouting furiously, Sol rubs her sore forehead while the older soldier watches her with warm amusement. Shifting the conversation, Balboa casually asks if the humiliated recruit Nad is still stubbornly ignoring her presence. Dropping her hands with a heavy sigh, Sol admits that their strained relationship remains completely unchanged. Waving off her concern, Balboa advises her not to overthink the situation since Nad is simply struggling with his own defensive stubbornness. Sol confesses she feels genuinely guilty for crushing his pride but lacks any experience in making up with angry comrades. The veteran gently reassures her that forcing a clumsy reconciliation is completely unnecessary at this point. He adds that they will finally be relieved of their grueling duties and sent home once Lieutenant General Rosburn takes command of the fort. Pausing for a moment, he assumes she naturally recognizes the legendary name of the Empire's prestigious Six Wings. Sol smiles confidently, asserting that absolutely no one on the entire continent is ignorant of those renowned champions. Balboa reflects on the heavy weight of the Six Wings title, a glorious honorary medal existing since the very dawn of the Empire. He visualizes Irene Delfour, the terrifying humanoid monster widely feared as the absolute greatest hero of humanity. He pictures Grish Delfour, a legendary woman who rapidly ascended to the military's absolute highest rank of general by age 40. Next is Sigur Nibris Ibrisis, a fiercely loyal commander who leads a highly trained knight order he raised entirely by himself. He thinks of Rosburn Rustymane, a remarkably steady leader who commands immense trust from his subordinates due to his level-headed personality. Then there is Libereshro Enviroa, an undeniably brilliant but notoriously eccentric tactician who excels at catching enemies completely off guard. Finally, he recalls Justia Vorzult, a dangerously silent fighting general widely whispered to be the most handsome man in the nation. Brimming with anticipation, Sol enthusiastically notes how incredibly exciting it is that these fabled warriors are coming to their exact location. Balboa immediately scoffs at her starry-eyed optimism, bluntly questioning if she seriously believes she can even get close to them. Completely unfazed by his skepticism, Sol boldly declares that her ultimate dream is to one day become a true hero. The older soldier sharply shoots her down, warning her that she completely lacks an understanding of her proper place in the world. Recalling his terrifying days in Irene's division, he shudders and insists the woman's elegant appearance is nothing but a mask for an inhuman monster. Staring grimly at the ambitious girl, he warns that she could dedicate her entire lifetime to training and still never reach that unfathomable level. Flashing a cocky smile, Sol completely ignores his dire warning and claims that striving to be the strongest is a classic man's romance. Clenching her fists, she passionately insists she must rush to the battlefield and absolutely cannot afford to neglect her rigorous training. Landing another swift flick on her forehead, Balboa jokingly corrects her that such foolish dreams belong strictly to children rather than men. His tone softening slightly, he confesses that he too harbored a fleeting admiration for the heroic ideal back when he was her age. Gazing earnestly into her eyes, he gently reminds her that a bright, peaceful future awaits her far away from the blood-soaked battlefield. The young warrior remains completely silent, carefully processing the veteran soldier's surprisingly heartfelt and fatherly advice. 5 days later, the expected arrival of Lieutenant General Rosburn is abruptly delayed by a sudden, unforeseen tactical shift. A booming command violently shatters the peace of the fort, ordering the Imperial forces to immediately launch a massive surprise attack. The glory-hungry interim commander declares they will detour around the mountains to crush the fleeing coalition and present the absolute victory to Rosburn. Watching the frantic mobilization, anxious soldiers question the hasty operation while others arrogantly assume their overwhelming numbers guarantee an easy win. Mentally analyzing the chaotic deployment, Sol acknowledges that launching a swift, detouring strike before the enemy can fortify is a theoretically sound tactic. However, a creeping sense of foreboding grips her mind as she critically evaluates the dangerous reality of their current military situation. Gazing out over the fortifications, Sol senses a dark premonition and murmurs that this current strategy might be a terrible idea. Relegated to the rear guard, the squad to which Sol officially belongs is strictly ordered to defend the occupied fort. Watching the departing assault team, Sol intensely analyzes the soldiers and identifies a particularly muscular warrior who radiates immense strength. Her sharp veteran eyes scan the moving ranks, casually picking out several more seasoned fighters who clearly possess real combat substance. Frustrated by her boring defensive assignment, the battle-hungry girl sighs deeply and wishes she could have joined the frontline assault team. Clicking her tongue in pure annoyance, she bitterly crosses her arms and watches the glorious battle march away without her. The tense atmosphere heavily lingers as the defensive squad remains firmly stationed at the fortress. Time quietly passes at the garrison while the sun sets on the soldiers' tedious defensive assignment. Standing atop the quiet battlements, a weary guard turns to greet Balboa and gratefully announces that it is finally time to switch shifts. Startled by Balboa's sharp vigilance, his fellow guardsman chuckles and teases the corporal for being so surprisingly earnest during a routine watch. Leaning lazily against the stone wall, the guard dismisses the outpost battle as an easy victory and admits he cannot take guard duty seriously with Lieutenant General Rosburn approaching. Frowning slightly at the sheer complacency, Balboa reluctantly agrees that the entire garrison shares that dangerous overconfidence. Trying to articulate his unease, the corporal mentions that the peculiar refugee child keeps saying incredibly strange things about their tactical situation. He explains that the kid specifically warned of an impending surprise attack within days, prompting his comrade to laughingly ask if the child is some kind of prophet. Continuing his complaints, Balboa sighs that the energetic brat constantly runs around messing with fort supplies and driving the stiff-necked Nad absolutely furious. The relaxed guard sarcastically congratulates him on the headache, though Balboa merely shrugs and claims he is completely used to it from raising his own little sister. A sudden, tense pause loudly interrupts the guard's casual conversation as an unseen presence catches their undivided attention. Before the other guard can mock Balboa's sentimental sister stories, a sharp command cuts through the air and forces him to abruptly halt his departure. Squinting into the dense shadows beyond the fort walls, the confused sentries struggle to identify a mysterious, approaching shape. Gripping the stone railing in sudden alarm, Balboa desperately tries to make out the silhouettes emerging from the absolute darkness. Drawing his weapon defensively, the veteran corporal barks a fierce order demanding the unknown platoon immediately halt and identify themselves. A voice shouts back from the darkness, frantically claiming to be messengers for Major General Donnell delivering vital communications and seeking emergency food supplies. Buying into the clever deception, the guards assume Donnell is planning for a long-term battle and foolishly order the heavy gates to be opened. Still harboring a tiny sliver of tactical caution, Balboa steps forward and sternly demands to see the messengers' faces clearly under the torchlight. The true, terrifying faces of the mysterious approaching platoon are finally revealed under the fort's dim lighting. Mocking the gullible Imperial guards as spineless fools, the disguised infiltrators draw their hidden steel with terrifying precision. Roaring with fierce nationalistic pride, the coalition commander orders his men to break the front lines and hoist the flag of Raftinon over the fort once again. A chaotic frenzy of bloody violence violently erupts at the gatehouse as the coalition completely blindsides the Imperial sentries. Frantic alarm bells finally shatter the night as panicked survivors scream that the coalition forces have launched a full-scale surprise attack to reclaim the fort. The sheer chaos of the sudden enemy assault instantly validates Soul's previous tactical warnings. Calmly rising amidst the rising panic, the reincarnated veteran tightens her grip on her weapon and coldly notes that the real war has finally begun. Total pandemonium grips the fortress interior as terrified recruits stumble out of their bunks, stammering in absolute confusion at the sudden slaughter. A desperate officer curses their terrible luck, realizing the enemy flawlessly timed their brutal assault when both the commander and the six wings are completely absent. Overwhelmed by the sheer ferocity of the coalition's sudden breach, the cowardly Imperial recruits instantly break rank and scream for everyone to run away. Spotting Soul casually walking toward the front line, a frantic Nad screams that this is not a game and angrily demands to know where she thinks she is going. Without breaking her confident stride, Soul glances back at the terrified soldier and nonchalantly assures him that she perfectly understands the lethal stakes. Flashing a genuinely thrilled and bloodthirsty smile, she stares straight into the burning chaos and cheerfully asks him if the impending battle is incredibly exciting. Leaving the trembling boy behind, the tiny warrior fully prepares herself to plunge headfirst into the exhilarating carnage to test her new strength. The scene opens with a bold title card signifying the imminent clash. A sudden flurry of violent movement erupts across the chaotic battlefield. Brutal strikes land with bone-crushing force as the defenders desperately try to hold their ground. Blood sprays through the air as another soldier is mercilessly cut down. Panting heavily from the exertion, a stunned Imperial soldier realizes just how overwhelmingly strong the invading forces truly are. Staring in horror at a towering enemy warrior, the soldier suddenly recognizes the giant as the up-and-coming hero, Balboa Ramaholto. He confirms with absolute dread that this monstrous man is a genuine hero of the Raftinon kingdom. Desperately trying to maintain order, a frantic commander orders his wavering men to fire and hold their ground. A volley of projectiles launches toward the towering enemy champion. The devastating counterattack easily swats away the desperate barrage. Glaring down at the terrified soldiers, the imposing hero disgustedly mocks them as pathetic insects. Observing the massacre, an officer realizes the coalition is deadly serious about taking down the base if they deployed an actual hero. He nervously recalls that the outpost relies entirely on 4 magic chambers, which project impact-dampening barriers crucial to their survival. Knowing the base will fall if the chambers are destroyed, he frantically tries to predict which of the 4 directional nodes the hero will target first. A panicking messenger suddenly rushes up to Corporal Balboa, screaming that the East squads have been completely wiped out. The corporal curses their terrible luck, realizing the enemy ruthlessly breached the path to the Eastern magic chamber right at their thinnest defensive point. Meanwhile, several moments earlier in a different part of the fortress, a bewildered Nad stares at Soul in absolute confusion, demanding to know why she is looking forward to this bloody nightmare. Grinning wildly, Soul cheerfully declares that this raging battle is her very first step toward becoming a true hero. Utterly baffled by her insane optimism, Nad can only stare at the tiny girl in stunned silence. Deciding he cannot be bothered to babysit a suicidal lunatic, he angrily tells her to die on her own and sprints away. Soul watches him flee with a completely unfazed and nonchalant expression. The fierce battle begins to surge closer to her current position. Enemy soldiers flood into the courtyard, raising their weapons with lethal intent. Unintimidated, Soul effortlessly dodges a rapid strike aimed right at her head. She fluidly counters the assault with blinding speed. Pausing amidst the carnage, she coldly analyzes the tactical situation to sort out the enemy's true objective. She deduces that the treacherous ravine terrain limits the enemy to a platoon-sized force aiming to recapture the outpost. However, she quickly realizes that a small-scale surprise attack would normally be a pipe dream against the entrenched Empire forces. Connecting the dots, Soul excitedly concludes that this impossible assault must be spearheaded by a genuine hero. A thrilling jolt of anticipation courses through her veins as she marvels at the opportunity to fight a hero so soon. Gripping her weapon tightly, she fiercely welcomes the ultimate challenge. Reasoning that the enemy champion is undoubtedly targeting the magic chambers, she decides she must hurry to intercept them. Burning with battle lust, she desperately wants to meet the hero to test exactly how effective her new body really is. Confident that the champion will eventually appear there, she pivots and sprints toward the closest magic chamber. She blasts across the battlefield with unnatural, explosive speed. Kicking up a massive cloud of dust, she launches herself forward like a fired cannonball. Her slender form blurs past the chaotic skirmishes as she zeroes in on her target. She effortlessly slices through anyone foolish enough to block her path. Leaving a trail of destruction in her wake, the reborn warrior charges headfirst toward her fabled prey. Rushing forward, Soul deduces that if the coalition soldiers were waiting there, it must mean something significant. Leaping through the air, she races with urgent speed toward her ultimate destination. She narrows her eyes as a tactical realization suddenly dawns on her. A seasoned, battle-hardened knight stands tall amidst the carnage with his blood-soaked blade drawn. Gazing over the conquered territory, the veteran grimly declares that this land is the Garden of Rafting. Tightening his grip on his weapon, he swears an unwavering oath to take it back. The battered bodies of defeated Imperial soldiers litter the cold ground around his boots. With a swift, practiced motion, the knight violently flicks the fresh blood from his steel. Disappointed by the lack of challenge, he scoffs and asks if this pathetic display is all the Imperial army can muster. Surveying the utter lack of resistance, he confidently proclaims this battle an absolute victory for the coalition. Reflecting on his long career, he considers reclaiming the Garden of Rafting a perfectly fitting final battle to end his 20 years of soldiering. Suddenly, the veteran detects an unexpected and mysterious presence approaching his position. Stepping quietly into the light, the tiny, blood-splattered figure of Soul finally reveals herself. Stunned by the surreal sight, the seasoned knight gasps in total disbelief at the appearance of a mere child. His mind races as he frantically wonders why a young girl is wandering through such a brutal war zone. A chill runs down his spine as he shockingly realizes he felt absolutely no killing intent from her approach. Ignoring his confusion, Soul smoothly slides her foot backward to sink into a flawless combat stance. Looking up at the towering veteran, a fearless and bloodthirsty smile completely overtakes her young face. Recognizing his familiar posture, Soul's eyes widen with genuine, uncontainable excitement. She immediately identifies him as one of the absolute oldest and most respected veterans of the Rafting Kingdom. Without a shred of hesitation, she calls out his legendary name, Captain Terich Gardy. Startled that she knows him, Terich questions her while Soul affectionately replies that she could never forget a former mentor. Thrilled by this unexpected reunion, she admits she was hunting for a hero but is overjoyed to find such a strong warrior instead. Pointing her weapon forward, she eagerly challenges Gardy to a life-or-death spar. Utterly baffled by her insane behavior, Terich questions if this impossibly young girl is truly an Imperial soldier. His eyes narrow sharply as he finally notices that the child's clothes are completely soaked in fresh coalition blood. Deducing the terrifying truth, he realizes she must have slaughtered her way through all the heavy sentries on his flank. Pushing past his disbelief, the honorable veteran decides to properly introduce himself to test her true mettle. Standing proudly, he formally declares his rank as captain of the Rafting Kingdom army and his title as the Last Knight. Leveling his massive blade, he demands to know if his tiny challenger has a worthy name to offer in return. Lowering her weapon slightly, Soul calmly admits that up until this point she was nothing more than a nameless drifter. Raising her chin with unshakable confidence, she claims her new identity within the Empire Army. She humbly refers to herself as a mere enlisted soldier standing before a living legend. With burning resolve in her eyes, she formally introduces herself simply as Soul. Terich gasps internally, utterly shocked that a mere child flawlessly returned the formal etiquette of a sacred duel. He marvels at the sheer impossibility of someone so young possessing knowledge of such an ancient and obsolete combat custom. Casting aside all remaining doubts, the veteran knight officially acknowledges her warrior spirit and accepts the duel. Maintaining her flawless manners, Soul graciously states that she was merely responding to his proper courtesy. Eager to test her strength, she casually notes that she is short on time and asks to begin the clash immediately. Agreeing with her urgency, Terich braces his stance and promises to treat her not as a child, but as a fellow soldier. With a thunderous roar, the Last Knight fiercely launches his devastating opening assault. Blurring with incredible speed, the two warriors violently clash in a brilliant shower of sparks to begin their fateful duel. Historically known as revered warriors who specialize in single combat tactics, the knights protect the kingdom and serve as a powerful symbol of national might. However, their glorious legacy has faded into a mere relic of the past following the terrifying emergence of the hero. Despite this tragic decline, the Last Knight Terich Gardy carries on that noble will by continuously fighting on the brutal front lines. Blades violently clash as the Last Knight and his tiny opponent lock weapons in a fierce test of pure strength. Sparks rain down across the ruined courtyard as the two warriors furiously exchange a rapid flurry of heavy blows. Moving with terrifying grace, Soul effortlessly deflects the massive sword strikes despite her incredibly small stature. Pushing forward with overwhelming momentum, the veteran knight swings his heavy blade to crush her fragile guard. Watching her flawless footwork, Terich realizes in utter shock that she has seamlessly adopted the Niravart style, a stance completely unique to traditional knights. He marvels at how this mysterious young girl has seemingly mastered the ancient, long-forgotten sword skills of knights from days of old. Capitalizing on his momentary distraction, Soul launches a lightning-fast counterattack aimed directly at his exposed center. The seasoned veteran reacts just in time, violently bringing his massive blade around to intercept the lethal strike. Even as he successfully blocks the assault, the veteran knight remains utterly baffled by her impossible level of advanced swordsmanship. Smiling confidently through the clash, Soul presses her advantage and boldly points out that she already knows his subtle combat habits. She coldly explains that whenever he feels resistance against his blade, he instinctively leaves a slight but fatal opening. Terich grunts in absolute disbelief, his mind racing as he tries to comprehend how a mere child could read his movements so perfectly. Gathering his immense strength, the last knight unleashes a devastating, wide swing in a desperate bid to force her back. Soul effortlessly glides beneath the deadly arc, completely neutralizing his raw power with flawless agility. The deafening crack of clashing steel sends a violent shockwave echoing across the blood-stained battlefield. Refusing to underestimate her any longer, Terich tightens his grip and formally declares that he will no longer question her warrior's resolve. Feeling the crushing weight of his renewed assault, Soul grits her teeth and silently notes just how incredibly heavy his blows have become. Utilizing her diminutive size, the reincarnated warrior slips past his oppressive guard with terrifying, ghost-like speed. She mockingly quotes an old battlefield adage to shatter his focus, reminding him that warriors who turn to defense are always accompanied by blinding overconfidence. Grinning fiercely under the intense pressure, she genuinely praises his impressive skills and fully embraces the exhilarating thrill of the duel. Forced firmly onto the defensive, Terich hastily steps backward to avoid a lethal slash aimed straight at his throat. Refusing to give him a single inch of breathing room, Soul violently presses forward with a relentless storm of strikes. Parrying the ferocious onslaught, the veteran knight frustratingly admits to himself that he simply cannot find a safe opening to finish her off. He stares in awe at her incomprehensible movements and words, realizing that everything about this girl defies fundamental combat logic. Sweating profusely under the relentless pressure, he frantically wonders what kind of monstrous entity is actually hiding within this child. Acknowledging her tremendous spirit, the last knight suddenly shifts his footing to unleash his ultimate defensive countermeasure. Soul immediately halts her advance, recognizing that his deadly reach has created a literal space of death where stepping inside means instantly forfeiting her life. She carefully analyzes his flawless defensive perimeter, noting that not even a single insect could survive within his terrifying striking range. Dropping into an impregnable stance, Terich solidifies his technique and confidently declares his ultimate defense completely formed. Undeterred by the impossible wall of steel, Soul lowers her center of gravity and prepares to shatter his grand illusion. Exploding off the cracked earth, she blurs into motion and charges directly into the deadly heart of his lethal zone. Reacting instantly to the suicidal intrusion, Terich brings his massive sword down with absolute, merciless killing intent. A blinding flash of sparks violently erupts as their blades collide at the very center of his impenetrable defensive zone. Pushing past her physical limits, Soul forcefully redirects his heavy blade and shatters his guard with a singular, devastating strike. The last knight's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror as his ultimate defense completely crumbles before the tiny warrior. Reeling from the overwhelming clash, Terich gasps in pure shock at her impossible speed despite the fact that she is wearing cumbersome armor. Standing victorious amidst the swirling dust, Soul stares down at the defeated veteran as the chaotic battlefield falls completely silent. Staring in absolute shock, the knight blurts out a confused question as the battle intensifies. Relentless strikes rain down one after another, pushing the physical limits of the combatants. Heavy blades violently clash in a flurry of sparks, demonstrating the sheer power behind every swing. Thrilled by the tension of single combat, Soul enthusiastically praises the knight's magnificent swordsmanship. Deflecting another heavy blow, the veteran knight wryly notes that his young opponent is surprisingly talkative. Chuckling amidst the lethal dance, Sol apologizes and admits her tongue grows loose whenever her blood boils. Seizing a momentary opening, Tarich fiercely responds that such casual banter during a duel is a clear indicator. He swings his massive sword with crushing force, declaring her talkative nature to be a true sign of absolute confidence. The weapons violently connect once more, sending a massive shockwave ripping through the ruined courtyard. Sparks explode into the air as the sheer kinetic energy of their clashing steel threatens to shatter the ground beneath them. Gritting his teeth under the immense pressure, the veteran knight desperately tries to force the tiny warrior backward. Sol effortlessly spins out of the weapon lock, using her small stature to smoothly evade his crushing guard. Slipping into extreme close quarters, she maneuvers gracefully through his heavy defenses with ghost-like agility. The duel devolves into a blinding blur of high-speed strikes as the two warriors trade lethal blows without a shred of hesitation. Tarich frantically parries another devastating slash, his mind struggling to comprehend her impossible attack speed. Gasping for breath, the bewildered veteran demands to know what kind of entity she truly is. Stuttering over his own words, Tarich realizes that her advanced combat style completely defies her tender age. He senses an eerie familiarity in her flawless movements, feeling as though he is fighting a bizarre outsider. Pointing out how she swings her sword in perfect time with his own, he demands to know if she truly knows him. Sol calmly confirms she learned by watching him, leaving the seasoned knight utterly stunned by the casual revelation. Frowning in total confusion, Tarich firmly states that he possesses absolutely no memory of ever meeting her. Unfazed by his lingering doubt, Sol sincerely promises that she would never lie to her former mentor. Shifting her stance with lethal intent, the young warrior prepares to finally end the grueling duel. She admits her high magic consumption was entirely necessary just to break through his impenetrable defensive range. Counting her strikes aloud, she launches a blindingly fast assault and calls out her first precise hit. Her blade seamlessly slices through his heavy armor, drawing fresh blood in a brilliant flash of steel. Cursing in sudden pain, Tarich recoils as Sol ruthlessly calls out her second devastating strike. Pivoting with flawless momentum, the tiny warrior readies her third and final blow to shatter his guard. She unleashes a colossal, bone-crushing swing that completely overwhelms the knight's remaining defenses. A pained gasp escapes the veteran's lips as the sheer force of the impact tears mercilessly through his body. Sighing in disappointment, Sol laments that her unfamiliar body handles differently and regrets not cutting him down cleanly. Gravely wounded by the onslaught, the towering last knight stumbles backward as his strength finally abandons him. Reeling from the impossible defeat, Tarich wonders how someone of his caliber could lose despite never letting his guard down. Accepting the harsh reality, he realizes the humiliating loss simply boils down to a fundamental difference in raw skill. Falling heavily to his knees, the seasoned veteran solemnly asks if this is truly his final curtain call. He embraces his ultimate defeat, acknowledging this bloody clash as the final single combat of his long life. The once proud knight completely collapses onto the blood-stained earth, thoroughly vanquished by the tiny anomaly. A heavy, suffocating silence falls over the ruined courtyard as the dust finally settles around the two warriors. Staring up at the young girl's strangely familiar eyes, Tarich suddenly recognizes her true identity and gasps her name. His fading mind flashes back a full decade, unlocking a profound battlefield connection forged 10+ years ago. A bystander gestures toward a weathered figure and casually asks his companion what the deal is with the strange old man. Recognizing the veteran, the companion identifies him as the Shura, a crazy warrior who stubbornly remains on the brutal battlefield despite his advanced age. Staring after the aging soldier, the gossip callously wonders when the old man will finally kick the bucket. Flashing back to a past encounter, a polite voice asks the old swordsman for a moment to question why he continues to stay on the battlefield and if he harbors a specific goal. Pausing thoughtfully, the veteran solemnly replies that there is a certain task he simply must accomplish. Intrigued by the cryptic answer, the unseen speaker presses him to reveal exactly what it is that he is so driven to achieve. Gazing into the distance, the battle-hardened old man softly confesses that he still holds onto a lifelong dream. A tense silence stretches between the two figures before the speaker finally breaks it to ask for clarification. The question hangs heavily in the air as the speaker demands to know the true nature of this unyielding dream. Unfazed by his own frail appearance, the veteran boldly declares his absolute desire to become a hero, aspiring to be the strongest among all humanity. He fiercely explains that throwing himself into the crucible of combat is the absolute fastest way to make this impossible dream a reality. The old warrior stands firm in his conviction as the sheer weight of his impossible ambition settles over the memory. Genuinely moved by the veteran's resolve, the speaker praises his splendid dedication and urges him to continue chasing his ultimate goal. Snapping back to the bloody present, Soul's eyes burn with that same inherited determination as she reaffirms her unyielding path. Over on the chaotic battlefield, a shocked voice officially announces that the legendary knight Terich Gardi has miraculously fallen in combat. Lying defeated on the ground, the vanquished last knight mentally apologizes to a comrade named Bogart for his humiliating failure. The dust continues to settle around the fallen veteran as the devastating reality of his unimaginable defeat completely sinks in. An intimidating and imposing enemy figure violently steps onto the ravaged battlefield to survey the absolute carnage. Looking down at the slaughtered soldiers, the massive newcomer arrogantly mocks the world-renowned Empire army for lacking any real bite. Brandishing his own massive weapon, the hulking coalition warrior confidently swears to turn all their imperial ambitions into nothing but a fading dream with his sword.